What's up, guys? 1-2 last night. Only a small loss, though, based on the way the money lines worked out. The big underdog money line on Montreal probably should have gotten there. I mean, I think it was clearly the right play to make at that price. They had a 2-1 lead in the third period, like midway through the third period, allowed the game to be tied, and then lost in overtime, which is brutal. Although they did get outstatted in that game. The shot discrepancy was definitely far and away not in their favor, but still, you have a plus 180 money line underdog and you're winning the game midway through the third period. It's looking pretty good. It looks like you made the right play on that one. Buffalo Sabres won, and then the Pittsburgh Pirates, that one just didn't get there. Even if they had if I'd played a first 5-inning bet on that one, it still wouldn't have won. They were down 1-0. But even if they had the lead after that, the full gameplay apparently was not the way to go in that one, as Pittsburgh's bullpen was the worst part of that game. We'll forget about it. We'll move on to today. I'm skipping the whole NBA card. This late season NBA, man, even though it is a Friday night packed NBA card, late season NBA, when you come down to the last couple days of the NBA season, yeah, I mean, you can find some motivational spots, but there's really nothing that I am that interested in. I mean, I think debatable, you could say that the Suns might be in a better motivational spot than the Kings because they're trying to avoid the play-in games entirely. But the Kings are still trying to avoid having to play 2 play-in games. They do not want to fall into the 9 and 10 spots, really, so that is what they're playing for. So still a situation where both teams have something to play for, but I believe the Suns were off last night, although they are coming off that huge revenge win over the Clippers. But the Kings played last night, but they did also lose at home to New Orleans, which is why they're in the spot that they're in now, really fighting to avoid the bottom of the playing games where you have to win twice if you're in that scenario. So, I mean, it's an interesting game nonetheless, but I'm just going to totally avoid all of it. And then you do have I don't like the Knicks either, I will say. The Knicks just had a big win over the Celtics last night. They've clinched a playoff spot. They're in the 3 spot. They're looking pretty good to have a home series in the first round of the playoffs at the very least. It's unlikely that they're going to drop out of that. I believe they have a 2-game lead now over the 5 seed, which are now the Orlando Magic. I'm pretty sure is the scenario. So it's possible the Knicks don't play their best game tonight, and they're laying 10.5, coming back home from Boston off that big win last night on a back-to-back against the Nets. And the Nets, although the Nets have nothing to play for, the Nets are at least playing against their inner city rival at the very least. And their in-city rival, I should say. And I believe they had the day off. So I would lean to taking the points with the Nets in that one. I'm just not going to get involved in any of that. NHL, I'm going to jump on one motivational spot where I'm fading the public in this one. I'm going to fade the Carolina Hurricanes, and I'm going to take another big underdog here. Carolina's up from minus 191 to 197 on the money line. It's a pretty big road favorite, so it is possible you get a better puck line on this. You can get a puck line on St. Louis in a range that's closer to minus 120 where you might want to actually play it. That isn't the case right now, though. I think you have to lay, similar to last night, I think you have to lay minus 140 on it or something if you actually want to take that. I think you could just jump in on the money line on this one. This is a motivational spot here, man. I mean, Carolina, and it's a letdown spot. Carolina, I mean, they've clinched a playoff spot. It's pretty likely they're just locked into the 2 seed in the Metro Division at this point. 3 points behind the Rangers. I mean, yeah, it is possible they leap over the Rangers, and yes, they are still kind of fighting with Boston and Florida as far as home ice. As far as who would have home ice if these teams advance through the first round of the playoffs. But I don't know if Carolina's really that totally focused on that. They're coming off a huge win over the Bruins. They're on a 3-game win streak. That was a big, quick revenge spot, road win over the Bruins. I was on Carolina in that one. Big win. And now they're in a situation where they actually have 2 days off, which I think that might halt their momentum, really. They don't have any home games left on the season. They won their last home game. Their season is all going to finish on this road trip here. The 2 days off might, like I was saying, hurt their winning momentum a little bit. Because when you're winning, you really don't want to have that many days off. And they're coming off such a huge win over Boston. And with not as much to play for as St. Louis does, I think it's possible that Carolina's not in the best motivational spot here. even though they are still kind of fighting for seeding as far as like the series that are later on in the playoffs, but the teams really focus on that at this point. I'm not so sure. Whereas St. Louis, this is desperation mode for St. Louis, man. And normally I would say the pressure is kind of on that team if they're desperate like that. And the reason why they're desperate is because they weren't good enough to have locked up a playoff spot already. But St. Louis is a big home underdog here, man. So I think St. Louis, when you get a big underdog like this and you pretty much know that that team is going to have to show up and put in effort, I like that. I like that aspect of it. It is actually kind of crazy how the playoff scenario has worked out in the Western Conference, by the way, where every team that's in the playoffs right now has a positive goal differential, and every team, including St. Louis, that's out has a negative one right now. Though St. Louis is the shortest negative goal differential at -10, but it looks like in the West it's possible that that's the split where every team with a positive goal differential is in the playoffs and every team without one is out, which is not going to be the case in the East. It doesn't look like, but that is kind of crazy the way the West is shaped up. But St. Louis, they're 3 points out of the final wild card right now, so they're not eliminated yet. So they are playing for it, man. Trying to get that final wild card and steal it away from the returning champ Vegas Golden Knights. I think that puts St. Louis in a pretty heavy motivational spot here, and I think they're carrying some momentum coming into this game. They're staying at home. They're in the middle of a 3-game homestand. They won the first game back. They actually had 2 days off, coming back actually from the West Coast, where they went. They lost one of the games on the West Coast and then won the final one, and had lost in Nashville to start that road trip. They beat Anaheim in a shootout, came back home, and were not distracted. I think because they're still fighting for this playoff spot. They did not suffer a distraction spot, and with an extra day or two off there, that was, I guess, able to alleviate their distractions. They played against a Chicago team that really is not any good, obviously. St. Louis is able to get that win, and they only have 1 day off, but they're staying at home, and I think that might just help them carry some momentum into this game. This is still a big game, and this is their biggest home opponent left, as they do have Seattle up next. So Seattle's a much more winnable game, but I think they're going to be focused with a playoff team like Carolina coming into their place and having the nice momentum here, and with fewer days off to halt the momentum and no travel, I think they can just kind of continue that momentum into this game, and they absolutely need this game, man. And we're getting a big underdog price on the St. Louis team because Carolina is obviously the better team, but it's all about motivation at this point. And I think the motivation couldn't get any stronger than it is on St. Louis here. Basically fighting for like the last couple games here to try to get this playoff spot. It is not out of reach for them. And Vegas is also playing tonight, but they're playing after St. Louis does. So St. Louis is not going to have to be like scoreboard watching if that would come into play or anything like that, because Vegas is going to be playing after that. Although I guess the Vegas game will start while St. Louis's game is still on. But I think at that point, St. Louis is going to be focused on this game, and hopefully it's a close game at that point, or St. Louis is winning by a ton or whatever. And hopefully St. Louis just is in the game and is able to finish the game out here. So we'll take St. Louis. You can get it at plus 170 something right now, 176. Moving on into baseball, a couple of leans in baseball real quick. I do like Cincinnati, the Cincinnati Reds, but you're laying a bit of a hefty price on the road. But it is one of the spots that's the best to take a road favorite, with the White Sox returning home from a road trip. It usually tends to not be a good spot on a team that's returning home from a road trip. And when they're a bad team like the White Sox are and they're a home underdog, that tends to be a pretty bad spot for that home underdog, really, which I think is probably also why you see the cash differential on Cincinnati. Cincinnati is also public, but it's still the way I would lean. But you're laying like a hefty price to play Cincinnati, minus 170, something in that range, minus 165, or you could lay a run line on it. But to lay the run line, yeah, I mean, you could lay a 1.5 run line. You're paying about minus 110 for it. So that might be the way I would do it there and hope that Cincinnati wins by more than one run. Or DraftKings, as I pointed out yesterday, offers alternate run lines. You can pick any run line, basically, and they adjust the juice on it. They have this run line, like picker, basically. So you could take a minus 1 run line, but for Cincinnati, they're going to make you pay like probably minus 130 or something on that, or maybe more. So I don't know if that's the way that I would look in that one, but I think Andrew Abbott is just the much better pitcher. Neither of those starting pitchers have been seen that much by the opposing hitters, but Abbott, he has much better strikeout potential, though his whip over his career has been too high so far because he's walked too many guys. But the White Sox are 0 for 5 lifetime off him. His strikeout numbers are very good over his short career, whereas Flexen for the White Sox has been kind of a journeyman. He's bounced around because he's never really been good. He had one pretty decent season with Seattle back in, I think, 2021. But other than that, his numbers have just been awful. And in a very small sample size, but the Reds are, I believe, 3 for 14 off of him lifetime as well. So over a 300 batting average, but not much you can take away from a small sample size. But Flexen is the much, much worse pitcher there. And the White Sox are in the much worse scheduling spot there. Cincinnati had an unexpected day off. So now both of those teams had yesterday off. But for the White Sox, it was having to travel back home from multiple road series, whereas for Cincinnati, they I believe they were just sitting around at home waiting to play the Brewers, and it got rained out. So now they're just traveling on the road on a short road trip up to Chicago a short trip to start the road trip, I should say, up to Chicago. So I like Cincinnati in that one, and I like the under in the Cubs Seattle game, but that line has gotten away from you a little bit if you want to play the under, I think. It looks like it was 8, 8 at minus 110 for a while, but now it's 8 with heavier juice is probably the best you can do. And it looks like it's slipping even lower than 8, potentially into the 7.5 range, because that's a situation where you have Wicks against Miller is the starting pitching matchup there. Neither of those teams have been seen that much before by the opposing hitters at all. Very small sample size. And it's both like pretty good young pitchers in that one with pretty good stats, although Wicks is another guy who he actually has given up too many like hits recently, basically. So he has to keep that down because his other numbers aren't really that bad. And Miller also has been pretty good in his short career as well, and not much of a track record for these hitters against those pitchers. Pitchers really not having been seen much. So I think the pitchers could have some decent advantages in that one. So I lean to the under in the Cubs-Seattle game there. The actual games I'm going to be on. First game that I'm going to be on. What am I on here? A little bit earlier in the evening, 10 minutes before some of these other ones kick off. Or kick off. What do you call it in baseball? Pitch off? I don't even know. Because kickoff is football. Tip off is basketball. I guess tip off or maybe face off is in hockey as well. I don't know what the hell you call it in baseball. The time the game starts, I'm going to jump on the San Francisco Giants for one of the two plays here. You can get it at minus 108. It looks like Tampa Bay, mostly slight favorite around. Actually, you can get minus 106, I should say. So San Francisco, you can get them. It looks like some books haven't even posted the number yet here, or some they're starting to post it now because we didn't know who Tampa's starter was even going to be, which I think is actually a disadvantage for Tampa because that kind of means that they are going to need to like find somebody quick to fill this starting pitching role for this game here, and it's probably going to have to be a guy who's not really that good. But looking at the market here, I mean, you can't really see the percentages yet, and it's just the line hasn't really moved around much. You just get both of these teams are basically sitting at almost the same price here, which means the books are telling you that San Francisco, I mean, they're obviously not the better team, but they're telling you that San Francisco has the advantage in this specific matchup here, and I tend to obviously agree with that because I'm playing them. Tampa Bay's already, if you look at the scheduling spot, they're already in a bad spot to start this out because they're returning home from a road trip, a 2-series road trip where they played in Colorado in elevation, and then they had to play on the Pacific Coast in LA, and they won the last 2 games. They actually did well on the road trip, 4-2 on the road trip. Tampa getting it going during the season here after a couple of tough series against the Blue Jays and the Rangers. They've actually won every series except the Texas Rangers one. Now they're returning home. So I think it's a bad spot, man. When you're returning home, like I always say, it tends to be a distracted spot. You're returning home from a fairly long road trip, 9 days spent on the road trip, basically. Now you're returning home with only 1 day off from the Pacific Coast out of playing in elevation and then on the Pacific Coast. And now you're returning home and you're facing a San Francisco Giants team that it hasn't been that good. How focused is Tampa really going to be on this one? I'm not so sure. Whereas for the Giants, I think they are in the better scheduling spot here as they're starting a road trip and coming off a win over the Washington Nationals, which ended a 2-game loss streak to the Nationals and helped them win. They won that final game of the series. So I think that's going to help them carry some momentum out. And yes, they are also traveling from Pacific Coast to East Coast, but they're starting a road trip as opposed to returning home. When you're starting a road trip, that tends to be a focus spot because you're leaving home and leaving where you might have some of those distractions and heading out on the road. And then it tends to mean that your focus is just purely on baseball there. So it's a much better spot for San Francisco than it is for Tampa for all those reasons as far as the scheduling dynamics are concerned. And with San Francisco having won their last game there against Washington, that might help propel them with some momentum into this road trip, giving them a little bit of confidence coming into this road trip. As far as Tampa, they have Wagues pack, as I was about to mention. Tampa needing to figure out who their starter is going to be on in a short amount of time here. Wagues pack is going to be pitching for Tampa here. Before this year, where he's only made 3 relief appearances this year, he did not pitch in the majors since 2020, where he also made no starts and only appeared in 11 games. He has not started a major league game since 2019, and his career stats are awful. He has a career 5.31 ERA, 1.54 whip, only 86 strikeouts and 46 walks and 101 and 2/3 innings. There's nothing to like about this guy's stats, man. He's 30 years old. He's just kind of a fill-in type of guy, a guy who can come in and just try to get some innings out of him. Basically, it looks like is really the situation there. He's been a long relief guy for Tampa so far this year. He's come in those long relief roles, and he hasn't really done that well in those roles either. He's given up 6 runs in 6 innings. He's walked 8 guys this year in 6 innings and only struck out 7. Hasn't been pitching well this year either. Now they're thrusting him into the starting pitching role just because I guess Tampa doesn't really have another option for this particular game here. That's not a good situation, man. Wagues pack, obviously the significantly worse pitcher in this game. We're getting a nice price given the situation and the pitching matchup here. We're getting a nice price here on the Giants. And for the Giants, we have Keaton Winn pitching, and I think he's going to be an advantage because he's one of these young prospects. He's 26, hasn't pitched much in the majors, and Tampa has never seen him before. So I think you're getting an advantage on the Keaton Winn side because of that, because these hitters have not actually faced this guy before. And if you look at Winn, the reason why he's 26 and he only has one partial season under his belt so far last year, where he only made 5 starts, is because he had Tommy John surgery, which is unfortunate, which I guess has kind of affected a couple of his pitches. But maybe he's getting back into it here because he's pitched a couple of times this year and he hasn't been bad, really. His ERA isn't very good on the season so far, 5.73 ERA. Strikeout walk ratio, definitely not that great either. 7 strikeouts, 4 walks, but he's getting some of those starts under his belt. His first start was against the Dodgers, who are a really good team, and he had 6 strikeouts and 1 walk in 5 innings in that one. So that wasn't bad at all. He had a worse start against the Padres, but even that one, he still only gave up 4 runs, so he was able to kind of limit the damage there. His whip is only 1 this year, so that's not too bad. You just want to see his walk numbers come down more and see his strikeout numbers go up a little bit, but he hasn't really been getting hit, so that's good. And if you look at the scouting reports on him or whatever, he's a guy. Yeah, I mean, the Tommy John surgery has affected him, but because he's now getting some of these games under his belt again, he's getting used to playing again. I think that he's going to be able to still throw at a major league level here. And I think he does have the advantage, as I keep saying, over these hitters who have just never seen him before. And he still throws high heat, man. He throws like a mid to upper 90s fastball. And his arsenal involves multiple other fastball pitches, which it does seem like those have been a little bit affected by the Tommy John. Although I think the Tommy John actually seems to have affected his slider the most as far as the movement is concerned. But that's something you might be able to work with and kind of get that back. You just kind of change if you can get used to some new mechanics and change your mechanics a little bit. But he also has a sinker and a splitter. So he has the types of pitches that you kind of see out of these relievers. It was thought he was going to be kind of like a back end type of relief guy because he has these multiple different moving fastballs that can fool hitters and a fast fastball. So it seemed like he was going to be in a relief role, but now they're, I guess, thinking about him as a guy who's going to be in the starting rotation, at least for now. But he does have good stuff, and I like what I see as far as the reports on like what Wynn can throw and what it looks like he has as far as stuff. I like that a lot better than going with Waguespack, a guy who's been in the league much longer and has just really been awful. And is just kind of a guy that you just throw in there because you basically have no other choice because you have to. So all of that, the scheduling spot and the pitching matchup, I'm going to go with San Francisco in that one. And then the final one that I'm on is going to be a somewhat similar spot. You do have some teams that are returning from road trips today, as you get a lot of times in these crossover days that are usually Monday and Friday, basically in baseball, where these new series begin, and you can find some teams that are returning from road trips and stuff. The other game I'm going to take is going to be on the Milwaukee Brewers at plus 100, and they're facing Baltimore, which is, of course, the team who now has Corbin Burns, Milwaukee's ace from last year, although he's not pitching in this game, so I don't think that's going to really be a factor here at all. But what is a factor here? Well, we'll look at the market first, I guess, in that one. Weird interleague matchup here. Baltimore is down from minus 115 to minus 112. They are public because people have been seeing how Baltimore's been playing recently. 65% of the tickets, but 79% of the cash. So according to pregame, they're public, but they do have more of the cash. But the way the line has moved does not indicate that they have more of the cash, as the line has moved down on Baltimore a little bit. And everything kind of puts the situation and matchup, everything kind of just puts me on the Milwaukee side in this one. Baltimore is another one of these teams that's returning home from a road trip, although they kind of stayed in the Eastern time zone. So it's not as ridiculous, but they don't have any days off. So they played at Pittsburgh. They only won one game in the Pittsburgh series, and now they're coming off a sweep of the Boston Red Sox. And even though Boston, they're down this year, but Boston was off to a pretty decent start this year, although they racked up some wins against some not very good teams. But there's still, Boston is still one of the biggest name teams in the AL East, man. And beating Boston, sweeping them in Fenway Park, pretty big deal for Baltimore. That's what they're coming off of. And not only did they have to play yesterday, but they had to play a 10-inning game yesterday. So even though they won by 5, they won in kind of dramatic fashion. They scored 6 runs in the 10th inning. Imagine having the under in that game yesterday, where I think it was 3-3 at the end of the 9th inning, and then I wound up 9-4 with 7 runs scored in 1 inning in the 10th. And Baltimore was able to beat Boston with Kimbrel coming in there to finish off the game, I think. He got the win, actually. He was the second to last pitcher for Baltimore. Former Red Sox closer for a little while, Kimbrel, now has been pitching against them as the closer for Baltimore. So Baltimore was able to win that game in dramatic fashion to finish the sweep on the road of Boston. No days off, and they used 5 relief pitchers yesterday in a game that went into extra innings. It basically used all their best relievers, and as I mentioned, their closer. They used a lot of their best relievers yesterday to finish off that game. So a lot of those guys are going to be unavailable today. So Baltimore, their rest spot, or lack thereof, having no rest, and the fact that they had to use so many out of their bullpen yesterday, and it just makes it all a bad spot for Baltimore, man. They have the less rested bullpen for sure. They're the less rested team because they had to play yesterday. They're traveling a little bit just from Boston to Baltimore, but with no days off and coming off, the dramatic win and a sweep over one of their big division rivals in Boston. And Baltimore started that series behind Boston in the standings, I think by maybe even 2 games, and now they're ahead of Boston with the sweep. Huge series for Baltimore. So this could be a letdown spot now, returning home and having to play a game that's, even though it is against a good Brewers team who were in the playoffs last year, I don't know, man. Baltimore could lapse in focus a little bit. It could be considered to be bigger to them to sweep a division rival like that in Boston than an interleague game against a Milwaukee team that they maybe care a little bit less about, even though, Milwaukee probably is a team that kind of cares a little bit more because Baltimore is the team that now has their ace from the last few seasons, or last several seasons probably, in Burns. So maybe Milwaukee is the team that is a little bit more motivated here. But as far as the scheduling is concerned, Milwaukee, as I mentioned when I talked about Cincinnati, Milwaukee had yesterday's game rained out. So Milwaukee got a day off unexpectedly yesterday. And they're just going from Cincinnati to Baltimore, also not really that much travel. They're mid-road trip. Cincinnati was the first road series of the trip for them, and they won the last 2 of those 3. They played 3 games. It was supposed to be a 4-game series. They had yesterday off, and prior to that, they'd won the previous 2 games against Cincinnati. So a little bit of momentum. I don't think having the day off would really hurt the momentum. I think that just kind of gives them a little rest, because a lot of times you have 1 day off between series anyway. They weren't expected to have a day off, and now they get the day off, which I think will help them let their bullpen rest a little bit. So their bullpen is going to have, I think, a much better situation in this game where they're going to have basically all of their relievers available, whereas Baltimore, like a majority of their best relievers, because of the extra inning game last night, are not going to be available in this game most likely. So everything about like the bullpen spot, the situational spot, it looks a lot better for Milwaukee in this one. Milwaukee, I mean, they're coming off winning those 2 games against Cincinnati, but Cincinnati not really considered to be that good a team. Baltimore is considered to be one of the better teams in the AL, and having to go into their place, I think that might help. That might be more of a focus spot for Milwaukee than it is for Baltimore, where Baltimore could even kind of be in a letdown spot, as I was kind of alluding to, off of such a big series with a dramatic finish against the Red Sox and being able to complete that sweep. And then looking at the starting pitching matchup, I think we got the edge there for Milwaukee as well with Freddie Peralta. I think he is the better pitcher in this game, man. He's looked good this year so far. He's a young guy. His stats have been good. Basically, since he's joined the league, his stats have been good, except for kind of a weird outlier bad season in 2019 where he didn't really pitch a full season as a starter there. He was a reliever that year, and he only made 8 starts. But other than that, he's been a starter basically since then. 2020, he was not either. But since 2021 onward for Milwaukee, he's been in the starting rotation, and he's been good over that entire span. Over his entire career, 3.81 ERA, 1.11 whip, and he's still only 27. So he's been in the league since he's been a really young guy, and his stats have been good the whole time. 764 strikeouts and 592 in the 3rd innings. That's a huge, huge strikeout rate there. Tons and tons of strikeouts and 228 walks. I mean, he's got to keep those walks down a little bit. The walks are probably the worst part of what you see out of him. He really is not very hittable. He strikes out a ton of guys. You know, he fools hitters based on those stats there. He's just got to keep the walk numbers down a little bit, but still 3.4 strikeout walk ratio, not bad. And this year he has been totally under control and totally in command against the Mets and Seattle. Maybe not the greatest offenses, but he's thrown 11 2/3 innings so far this year. In those 2 starts, he's only given up 5 hits, although he's given up 4 earned runs. So the amount of runs he's given up should actually probably be less, given the fact that he's only given up 5 hits and 2 walks, and he's notched 15 strikeouts. So everything about that looks really good. His strikeout numbers quite good, as he tends to do. His walk numbers pretty low this season so far in those 2 starts. So that tells you that he's in command right now, man. He's feeling it right now. Good numbers, and his ERA 3.09 should actually be lower based on the rest of those stats. There with only a 0.6 whip, so he has been quite good. And then looking at his stats against these Orioles hitters, even though the Orioles have a pretty good offense, their offense has kind of been struggling this year so far, though they turned it on in that Boston series, I mean, which I think is probably why Baltimore's a little bit public here, because they looked quite good in that Red Sox series, and they're starting to turn it on now. But against Freddie Peralta, small sample size, so he's kind of unfamiliar to them, but they're also only 3 for 16 off of him lifetime, with only 1 extra base hit, a 188 opponent batting average, 9 strikeouts, and no walks. So Baltimore's hitters have really not fared well against Freddie Peralta. His stats against Baltimore hitters quite good. And then on the other side, you got Tyler Wells pitching for Baltimore. He is the significantly worse pitcher, in my opinion, although his career stats aren't that bad. 3.99 ERA, 1.04 whip, but only 268 strikeouts and 290 2/3. So he's not as good of a strikeout guy. He doesn't overpower hitters as much as Peralta does, not nearly enough. And 76 walks, that's not that great for a 3.5 strikeout walk ratio. So similar to Peralta's strikeout walk ratio, Peralta, just based on looking at his stats, obviously has the significantly better stuff, and they both walk too many. Yes, the walk numbers are kind of a wash, but Peralta has kept his walks down this season, whereas Wells, maybe not exactly as much. Wells hasn't really been as good to start this season. Last year, his numbers are actually pretty good. His whip actually over the last, his whip over his career is quite good actually, but he has allowed too many hits. He's allowed too many runs basically in general. He's just been kind of mediocre. And this year, a lot of kind of the same. 11 and a third innings pitched. 6 earned runs allowed. That's not very good. Some of it because he's allowed 2 home runs, which isn't that great. 12 hits, not that great. He's allowed more hits than innings pitched. 10 strikeouts is pretty good, though, and 2 walks. So his strikeout-walk ratio has been decent this year, but the rest of his stats, I don't like what I see out of him there. And he's a little bit older than Peralta as well. Peralta's track record, I think, is actually significantly better. And then you go and the only other thing gives me pause is that the Brewers hitters have not really seen Wells before, and they're 0 for 6 of them lifetime with 3 strikeouts and 1 walk. So that gives me a little bit of pause, but everything about the situation other than that puts me on the Milwaukee Brewers side in this one. I think Peralta is the better pitcher out of these two, and the scheduling spot just dictates it. I mean, if you don't like that, then it seems like the under could also be a way to go in this game with both of these starters having not that much history against these opposing hitters. And when they've pitched against the opposing hitters, they've been good. But it does look like the over is public, but it looks like there is cash coming in on the over, driving the total up too. So I actually like the Milwaukee side as far as playing this game better. So those 3 plays, one more time: San Francisco Giants minus 106, Milwaukee Brewers. You can get it plus 100. At some spots right now, it looks like. So even money as the very small underdog there. And St. Louis Blues plus 176. I guess that's it for me, man. Peace. Let's stop treading water, man. We gotta win and recoup some of these losses. This has been the worst season that I've had. Like at this point in the season, this is the worst that I've seen since like 2015. This sucks. Let's do it. Peace.